would begin to mimic or look like the days of who? Noah, right? The days of Noah. So, it's not just an historical event that we're looking at, but it's actually a spiritual mirror. It is a mirror that we are called to look in and say, wait a minute, if the Bible says, as the days of Noah were, so shall it be before the Son of Man comes, then I need to look back and take a little glimpse into some things and kind of, I can sort of parallel the two. When we look at Noah's world, we'll see pictures of our own world. And when we look at Noah's faithfulness, we'll also see what God expects in terms of our faithfulness, because Noah was tremendously successful in his faithfulness to God. If you've ever been to the Ark Encounter, with Ken Ham's Answers in Genesis, museum, if you've ever been to that Ark, and you rode, come around that corner and saw the life-size replica, and you see just how involved Noah was and his family at what it took to create such a massive vessel and to be followed. I mean, for God to give us specific instructions, for Noah to follow it, and for it to be, the ark of safety for his family. I mean, it's just, you see just how dedicated Noah was to following exactly what God told him to do at that time. But it's amazing. I got as much out of standing outside the ark and looking up as I did inside of it. It's just amazing. I mean, something that he could build that big without modern day power tools, and for it to, it's some things just cause you to take a back, just sort of step back, and that's one of those things. And again, it was God provided the man and provided the power to do it. But let's look at a few things tonight about, again, how Noah and the flood relates to our world today. Number one, the condition of Noah's world is the condition of our world. Now, I'm not telling you that this is the exact same plane, okay? But what I'm telling you is we're not far, okay? If we hadn't overrun the bubble, we're not far from seeing catastrophic things go on in our day-to-day world like they would have saw in the days that Noah lived. It said in the days of Noah that the people were characterized by every imagination of the heart was only evil continuously. Let me give you some helpful advice here, okay? You can pretty much, the assumption used to be that people, believed in God, and the exception was people didn't, and you dealt with that. Well, listen, that has reversed today. We live in the world now that the assumption is there is no God, and the exception to that assumption is, oh yeah, there's some people out there that believe. Now that's based on, again, testimony after testimony of what you see in the world as it goes on. There is a world that is living as if there is no God. It is plain as the nose on your face. It is portrayed in the media. It is portrayed in any kind of thing you read, reports and stuff today. People today live like there is no God, like there is no judgment day coming. And so we know that the Lord is soon to return based on what Jesus said is, look, and if you see it and you begin to see the times, know that the Lord's going to return. It says in chapter 6 of verse 5, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. If we had a scale, I think we would probably tip the scale and say the wickedness of man is great in the earth. Okay? The wickedness of man is great in the earth. When you look at crimes people commit today, based on trials that are, being played out. And, if you don't really look at this stuff, you don't, it ain't like it showed up on. But the more we've started watching, like closing arguments and some of the things, and they bring up the daily court cases, you begin to see there's some crazy wickedness stuff going on in this world. When the Koberger case, where Brian Koberger killed the 4 college students, They just released more of autopsy results and some of the things, and it sort of went into some details about just how vicious that was. Just maniacally crazy. Brutal slave. You say, well, that's just, he's a psychopath and he's in prison the rest of his life. Should have got death penalty, but that, anyway. And that's a death penalty state, by the way, but they didn't do it. There's like, if that case don't get it, then nobody's going to ever get death penalty over there, okay? New Jersey, trial right now in New Jersey. It's like, well, it's the wickedness right now. It took 7 years to bring it to trial. Man in New Jersey, okay? The man in New Jersey is accused, and with very, very, very big, evidential factors going in this case, because he was embezzling money from his younger brother. They were in business together. He actually, because his younger brother had caught him, basically getting ready to cut him out of the business, went to his younger brother's house, shot his younger brother out in the yard, went in the house, stabbed and shot his sister-in-law. The two small kids came to uncle, and it had been uncle, stabbed them both to death, killed them both, set the house on fire, and then left and set his house on fire so somebody would think that they were an attack. So he killed his brother and his brother's entire family and his two little kids over money over and over again. I'm just saying that's one of many things that go on. A young girl on trial in Georgia for killing her mom and stepdad while they slept. She's like 17 years old, putting it, social media. I'm just telling you, you say, what does that mean? I'm just telling you that there's wickedness abounding. And it's not just what you see, it's what you don't see. It goes on. There's wickedness out there. We live in a wicked world. The Bible says the conditions of Noah's time is God saw the wickedness of man was great. It was a world filled with corruption. It was a world that had forgotten God. Again, we live in that world now where people, the assumption is there is no God, and the exception to the rule is there is. Right now, we live in a world that is completely distracted, deceived, and spiritually dulled. It is. But that was the days of Noah, wasn't it? Did it not say, in fact, in Matthew 24, it said, and they knew not until the flood came and took them all away. What does that tell you? Completely unprepared spiritually for what was coming. And that's the world we live in today. There's a world out there that is going to face judgment. The world in Noah's day was facing judgment, but they didn't care. They didn't acknowledge it until the flood came and took them all away. Listen to me. The second thing we notice is not just the condition of Noah's world's condition, but the character of Noah's walk is the call for all of us. What does it say about Noah? Okay, in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 9, it says, these are the generations of Noah. Noah's a just man and perfect, or basically in his generation, but it says, and walk with God. And so we have a world that's wicked, but we've got a man who is walking with God, which is completely opposites, right? We've got a 180-degree turn. Now, what pleased God was that there was a man who walked with him, and he was a just man in the midst of all of this wickedness, okay? He walked different. Listen, Noah was so different in the world that he did not blend in, okay? Noah stood out. Why? Because when righteousness is put into a perpetual melting pot of sin and disgustingness, it will separate itself. It will be different. Noah was different than the crowd that was around him. Noah held his faith and he walked with God. The expectation is for believers to do the same thing that Noah did, and that is be different than the world that you're in. The truth is that a lot of people go to church, or they look for a church that does not call them to be any different than they are outside of the church. They don't want to be different. They don't want to be uncomfortable. They don't want to have to, like the Bible says, we're supposed to be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our mind. People do not want to be transformed. They would rather be, they want to conform. They want to conform, and that's not what the Bible calls. Listen, if we see anything between how different is light and dark? It's pretty different, isn't it? Light and dark, very different. Light and dark, very different. Well, that's the difference in righteousness and unrighteousness. That's the difference in saved versus unsaved. There's a difference. And so if the difference has been, removed, there's a problem. That's not what Noah was about. Noah was different. He was just in an unjust world. He was righteous in an unrighteous world. He stood out. Holiness, listen to me, is not outdated. It's essential. And holiness will differentiate you from the world that is so dark. He also was a hard worker. You know what? Noah had a tremendous task that was given to him by God that took over 100 years to work out. I don't know if you've ever attempted a project that took over 100 years. I don't think we have, okay? I don't know that that's been on the radar. I don't know if we've ever got a set of instructions that we looked at and said, we might have said this is going to take me 100 years, but his legitimately took over 100 years. Why? Because it was such a monumental task. But he was not lazy. He was a hard worker. He worked hard and diligently. And listen, he took faith, he took sweat, and he took obedience, and he created what God had designed, and that was an ark for his family. And then notice this, that while he was doing all that stuff, he preached diligently. I mean, listen, he preached righteousness. In 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 5, Noah was a preacher of righteousness. You know what? He was building and he was telling people what was coming. Church, that's the responsibility that we have. Not just to be different, but in that difference, explain what's coming. You have to tell people what's coming. I mean, what is coming? Judgment is coming. The rapture is coming. Death is coming. I thought about, when they were talking about, when the world talks about death, they talk about it in the cessation of life itself. Like it just ceases to, you just cease to be. I recently watched, or I actually read a post and deciding whether I'm going down. If I go down, I don't know if I'm going back up. But I recently read a post, and it was from a YouTuber that I have followed, and he had one of his friends had passed away suddenly before Christmas. Actually, it was another guy that I followed on YouTube that died. He died in his sleep, and it was very tragic. I mean, he died, and the one that died was actually raised a preacher's kid, and he was a little different, but he had a good channel, and he did a lot of adventures and urban explorations and stuff. But anyway, so the guy's writing, and he's like, it's so hard for me to write this, knowing I'll never see you again, And then there were so many people commenting under there, like, you can see him again. You can see him again. This is what you can do to see him again. See him again. See him again. But the world that's basically the world's definition when it comes to death is it's just the cessation of any life. That everything's just done and over. I mean, you can go back historically, and they were talking about with the 40 years of the Challenger, but then you've had the Columbia disaster since then, where all those people died. Then you had the Challenger disaster. Then like 19 years before the Challenger, there was an Apollo disaster where people died. They were actually on the ground, and it wasn't. So you got all these people that, when they look at it, they sum them up and they say, well, they all died tragically, in space flight exploration and studying this stuff, but the whole epitaph the world leaves you is, this is the great finale. This is the end, you'll never see them, never do this, that. Now, there is a great separation that takes place. If someone's not saved and they pass from this world, they don't cease to exist. They don't just poof and they're gone. Because here's the reality. The reality is that all the people that's ever died is just as alive as they ever have been. You understand that? They're eternal. They don't cease to be. They're in one of two places eternally. So there's some truth. If someone dies without Christ, then yes, there is the no acknowledging of ever seeing that person again. I understand that. But for somebody that dies with Christ and somebody that's still here alive, there's always the hope that if they come to Christ, they can see them again. That's the hope we have as believers. The world offers not that hope. That hope's not in the world. The world says these people are dead, they're gone, move on. The world keeps going. The world keeps turning. You know, you're going to die. Hey, just get over it. You know, you better live your best life because you're going to be gone in a month. I mean, that's the mentality the world says. Now, Noah tried to preach to these people righteousness and say, you can get on this ark that I'm building and it will be a escape for you. This is the grace that God, I mean, he preached that, but the people were like, no need of that. That doesn't affect me any. And the truth is, listen, we've sort of overkilled it a little bit because we live in a society that, you know, everybody goes to heaven. Now, everybody has the ability to go to heaven. Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. But you have to do that part where it says, call upon the name of the Lord in order to be saved. It's not just a give me. It's not a ticket that you just all of a sudden you're alive, so it gets stamped on your forehead and you're just good to go. The world has that, you know, it's just they've crisscrossed so many lines, but it was very clear in the days of Noah. There was wicked, there was righteousness, there was the ark of safety, there was Noah preaching, hey, you need to turn to God, you need to change your ways. If they did that, they would be saved, they would be spared, they would be brought across, but they did not care, they did not acknowledge it, and he preached it for over 100 years, and he had not one convert. Had to be one of the most depressing or discouraging times of preaching in the history of preaching, to preach that long, and the only people that paid any attention to you was your family that was going to get the ark. But it goes back to Noah's character. He didn't just build it, but he preached it. He preached it. He preached it. And listen, but even though nobody listened to it, he still preached it. And so just like Noah, not just the world's shape, but we also see what Noah did is the responsibility we have. Because people are still dying. Don Hannah was here last Thursday night and gave a report on India. He couldn't be here Friday. But he was talking about in India how many people die, every minute basically, how much was it? Yeah, 26,000 a day died just in India. Okay? And, they don't, when we say die, they don't just, it's not annihilation, they just don't cease to exist. 26,000 people are thrust into eternity every day. They're still alive, but they're not alive on earth. The judgment has passed. So I'm just saying there's a lot weight on that. I mean, there's, which I would think that if I was living in rejection of God, and I thought if I lived in the idea that whenever I died that was it, that would be as miserable as anything that ever could be anyway. Because you'd be good gravy. What's the use? And so he walked differently and diligently, and he witnessed faithfully, and he warned the world that simply didn't want to listen. Sometimes, and it does rise up in you sometimes, maybe the human side comes just a little too to life. But when you see sometimes what goes on in the world today, and you hear sometimes the comments that's made in the world, and just the belligerent blasphemy that goes on, there's a part of you sometimes that wants to see them like just whenever, God just kind of says, let me show you something. And you just, you like, but we know that's not right. We know that's not what we should. We want them to get saved and not. But the ultimate thing is that, again, that's the flesh. But But the reality is, the Bible says at one day, every knee, right? Every head, every knee. It's one day. One day. One day, listen, it's all going to come to reality. But it came to reality for the people in Noah's day, but when did it come to reality? When God had shut the door and closed the window. Right? And the water broke forth. And so we don't want to be like that. And so when we look at this third thing, I know it's a little, but the consequences of Noah's choice are also the choice before our world. You know, Noah had a choice, right, wrong, he had a choice to do. Genesis 7:1 says, "Come thou and all thy house into the ark." Church, that's the choice the world has today. God offers salvation to everyone who will believe. The ark does show God's salvation. It has one door, one way, there's one hope. Jesus said, "I am the door." The flood shows God's judgment. As in the days of Noah, so shall it come to the Son of Man be. Listen, judgment is coming, isn't it? I mean, don't we realize one day God will judge this world? That we won't live perpetually in an age of grace where, you know, you won't be able to one day the door will shut. The line will be drawn. And it's too late then. When he shut the door, the opportunity ended. I believe today's world is living in those final moments of grace. And listen, Noah survived because he believed. Noah stood because he obeyed. If he hadn't obeyed, listen, if he hadn't obeyed, the ark would have never lifted off the ground. It would have filled with water and it would have sunk just. But Noah was saved because he trusted God. And, you know, again, as in the days of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. And that's the same thing that we go through today. And so I hope you'll just think a little bit about it, how Noah and the flood relates to us today, because it does. We're in that world. It's shouting to us every day. There's a lot of craziness out there. And it changes. Seems like every year it gets a little worse. But anyway,